Sanders Cave. I'm sure some of you have an adventurous spirit and have explored natural wonders that Mother Earth has to offer. I'd like to share one of my own such adventures with you about a place called Sanders Cave. Maybe you've been there yourself. It's off the beaten path, and there are no bathroom facilities or picnic tables. Why is it called Sanders Cave? I don't know for sure, but I think someone by that name once owned or still owns the land it is on. I know there was an article in the local newspaper about it once. Local legend says it was once used as a hideout for notorious outlaws, including Joseph Thompson Hare from the early 1800s and Jesse James and Clyde Barrows. It's said that the Confederate Army first dug out the present entrance to the cave from the side of a hill. They needed nitrate for gunpowder and used guano, bat droppings, from inside the cave. Anyway, we went there when we were kids, several times, with our parents, of course. The first time we laid eyes on Sanders Cave, we had gone with a group of family members. I can't remember everyone that was in the group that afternoon, but I know it was my parents, my brother and sisters, some of our aunts and uncles, and several cousins. It's located in the woods in Brooklyn, Alabama. That's in Conecuh County. We had to hunt for it, basically. I can't remember exact directions, but we had to go through a gate on an old trail. After a mile or so, we had to park our cars and walk a little ways through the weeds and the brambles and the dead fallen trees. It's near a branch, so we just sort of followed it by the branch. The first part of the cave that comes into view are the sides of its lime rock walls peeking through the treetops. We actually climbed up to one of the open crevices once. It was just a little recess in the cave wall about the size of a very small room. It was filled with fragments of white sun-bleached animal bones. Now that conjured up all sorts of wild imaginings about panthers and bears. It was rumored that a crazy old woman with long stringy black hair lived in the woods thereabouts, and if you heard something that sounded like the screaming, wailing cry of a wildcat, it was either her you were hearing or a black panther that had been seen in the area. Another urban legend says that a couple of guys camped out in the cave one night, and hearing the scream of the panther, one went outside with his gun to investigate. Well, he never returned, and the next morning his friend, who had stayed in the cave for safety, found him lying dead at the entrance of the cave. These stories were told to us as we were trekking through the woods toward the cave. Finally, after walking about a quarter of a mile, the entrance to the cave comes into view. It has a sort of oval or half-moon shape, not very big. When you enter the cave, you have to walk down a slope, and then you are in the mouth of the cave, about the size of a very, very large room. After your long, hot walk to reach it, you are instantly grateful for the blast of cool air that hits you in the face. The cave is the same temperature all year round. I guess that pretty much means if it's hot outside, you'll be cool inside, and if it's cold out, you'll be warm inside. No wonder ancient humans used existing caves as dwellings. That day the cave was really beautiful inside. There was a round hole like a skylight in the top that was filtering sun down into the cave. We assumed it had once been a smoke hole for whoever might have built a fire in the mouth of the cave. The sun shining down through the hole was reflecting off the beautiful stalactites and stalagmites hanging down from the ceiling and rising from the floor. They looked like glittery icicles to me. Water dripped slowly from the icicles, making the cave floor somewhat slippery in places. Of course, the rock wall was covered in in graffiti. It seems everyone has to put their John Henry on places like this. Me, my brother and sisters, and our cousins were having a blast that day exploring the cave. Even our parents were enjoying it. Our parents had brought food along, so we picnicked right in the entrance. A little later, the men folks decided to try and explore deeper into the cave. Armed with flashlights, they practically had to lay down on their bellies and slither through a small opening in the back of the cave. They yelled back to us from the other side and said they could stand up. They said there was a tunnel and they were going to explore further. Well, we didn't mind waiting in the entrance. We were collecting rocks and things. Our mothers didn't like it much, though. They were worried about them and told them to hurry because it would be dark before long. Soon we were joined by a group of teenagers with flashlights. I guess even though it was primitive and in the middle of nowhere, it was a pretty popular place. Believe it or not, every one of those teenagers, boys and girls, crawled into that little crevice in the back of the cave. Not long after that, our daddy and the rest of the men came back out into the opening and were a bit frantic. One of them had gotten sick. I'm not sure who, but I think it was Uncle Cleveland. They had to practically carry him outside the fresh air, into the fresh air where he was very sick, and laid on the ground for a while. I don't know what made him sick. Maybe he was claustrophobic. It was about that time we all heard what sounded like the keening scream of a wildcat. Our parents decided it was time to go, and we left as soon as Uncle Cleveland felt well enough to walk. We returned with our parents a couple of times after that, but always in the daytime. Once I do remember trying to go into the tunnel. I got a few feet in with my flashlight. It was wide enough and high enough, like being in a hallway in your house, but not quite the same. I realized that even with a light, you couldn't see very far ahead, and the tunnel curved in places. That was enough right then and there to convince me that caving was not for me. I could just imagine rats, bats, snakes, and spiders around the next bend. Daddy and my brother Mike said the tunnel just kept going, with lots of bends and other passageways leading off from the main one. They said all of the tunnels that they explored ended with crevices that were too narrow to get through to the other side. The saying is that if you walk far enough, you'll see daylight. But as far as I know, no one's proved it. Who knows how big that cave really is? Another memorable trip to Sanders Cave for me was when my cousin Diane and I decided one day to show Sanders Cave to our boyfriends. They had heard us talking about it and were interested in seeing it for themselves. So I spent the weekend with her, and that Sunday morning we got up early before church and cooked up a real good meal for our picnic lunch. Chuck and Vaughn, that were their names, were going to pick us up after church. Vaughn had a car, and Chuck had an old red International F-100 pickup truck. After church, we put the final touches on our special lunch and were ready to go when they got there to pick us up. I sort of knew the way, so Vaughn and Diane followed us. We finally found it, got parked, and started our trek through the woods. Unfortunately, we realized the branch had flooded, so we were picking our way through water and deadfall. At the mouth of the cave, the forestry conservation had put up a sign that said we couldn't enter during certain months of the year because of the bats' mating season. And of course, that was the time we were there. The guys entered just a few feet into the main entrance just to have a quick look around, and then we returned to our vehicles. That picnic lunch was calling us anyway. We had made fried chicken, potato salad, rolls, and last but not least, red velvet cake for dessert. Also, we had brought along a huge watermelon from Diane's granddaddy's field. After all, what's a picnic without a watermelon? We put the tailgate down on Chuck's truck and enjoyed some mighty fine victuals right then and there. That was a fun and special day. The guys must have liked our cooking pretty good, too, because they married us. Chuck and I returned once, a few years later, with our children, along with my sister Tina and her husband David and their children, when our kids were little. But because of the bats and the flooding and such, we haven't returned to Sanders Cave. I don't know if it's even accessible anymore to visitors or explorers. I know the bats there are on the endangered species list and have pretty much taken it over. I do have a few rocks from there as keepsakes. One in particular Daddy brought home. It's heavy and glitters like diamonds and rests in a special place in my garden. And another one that looks for all the world like a set of praying hands. But most of all in my heart, I'll always have the memory of my trips there with my friends and loved ones. So I hope you enjoyed that story, and I don't know, maybe someday you can visit there if it's still, I mean, I know the cave's still there, but if it's accessible. Thank you.